Hi, I'm Heather.
And this is Jax.
Welcome to Ask AI. Ask AI is a podcast dedicated to artificial intelligence. Finding out what artificial intelligence even means. We're going to learn as we go.
Let's talk AI.
We're really excited today to be calling into the nation's capital of Ottawa, the nation's capital of Canada being Ottawa, with Michael Karlin, who is a leader in this field of artificial intelligence and government. Thank you so much for making time for us today, Michael, or if you follow him on Twitter, the handle is @supergovernance. He's incredible. Michael, just to kick it off in your own words, what is artificial intelligence?
It's sort of the million-dollar question. In terms of government, that's kind of the one that lots of people need to answer because people are using the word regulate AI or what to do about AI. And when you talk to people in the field, you get different answers of what it actually is. But for me, AI is basically just computers performing cognitive functions that we used to do. And therefore, the term evolves as the technology evolves. As the technology is available that we take for granted, it's no longer AI, it's just software. So AI is the software that takes over some of our cognitive functions in the real world that wows us. And as soon as it doesn't wow us anymore, it's just software.
I alluded to the work that you're doing for the federal government of Canada, but I think it's much more interesting when you describe what you do. Can you share with the listeners of our podcast how you spend your time working for our government?
Sure. So the federal government, and sort of all departments and agencies, we're a bit obsessed now with improving the level of digital service that we provide Canadians. And so part of that is trying to see how we can leverage data analytics writ large, but also a little bit of AI to improve service delivery. And that's both the services that you interact with on a day-to-day basis or on a monthly basis to some of the more niche services that may affect certain sectors like regulatory compliance. So my job is lofty. I sit in the Treasury Board Secretariat and reporting up to the Chief Information Officer of the Government of Canada. And my job is to set the rules, try to develop the policies around people, and understand and help procure the tools needed to actually pull this off. So it's kind of evolved a little bit as we've worked with departments, and there's a bit of governance, data management, data science practices, and so they have a better understanding of what their needs are. When I started in this job, AI was still very much seemingly in the future, and then as I'm looking now, you have departments they're actively building tools. It's a pretty impressive proliferation. We're still very much in the sort of experiment, go off in a safe space and see what we can do and break things, but that's the first step to deploying some pretty cool stuff in the future.
So you mentioned about you're now in a space where you're kind of able to go off and try things and maybe even break things. I think that that's not the normal perception that people have of government. Even people who work in government may not feel like they're able to take those kinds of risks. But watching your office, there's a lot of interesting risks that you guys seem to be able to take. So what I'd love to talk about is the working paper that you first posted onto Google Docs, Responsible AI in the Government of Canada, publicly back, I think it was in October. And you've been collecting comments openly from around the world. I'd love to learn from you why you did that and what the experience has been like of moderating a paper like that.
Sure. So we learned a lot. I mean, first of all, it's a very flexible platform, and this was not a document that contained anything particularly sensitive. It was basically asking the question, and this goes back to like when I started this job, it was just me without much of a mandate. And like I basically wrote my own job description and wrote my own mandate and wrote my own job. And so when they were asking, well, what do we do about this? What do we do about rules? I said, well, why don't we turn to we don't have a ton of depth in the Government of Canada, and the depth that we do have is either in the National Research Council, which are building things for clients, or some in departments who are really busy trying to get their data house in order so they can do something. There's no one who could sit, think, and work through a lot of the sort of ethical issues or public policy issues. So why don't we turn to the world and get their perspective, because there's a lot of depth around the world. There's a lot of academics who've been thinking about this a very long time. Industry has strong perspectives, great perspectives in civil society. So turned to Google Docs and just started writing. I started the document, it was in October, and it was immediately after visiting the AI Now Institute. I met with Meredith Whitaker for just over an hour, and we talked about what would AI rules for government look like. I sat in a ramen restaurant at the bar for the next 2 hours, eating ramen and writing out the skeleton of the document, and then opened it up and got people to fill it in. And so it's just closed for this round of comments. But, the Google Doc was a bit of a challenge. Like, not a lot of departments have access to Google Docs in the office, and some people had problems with screen readers for the people who are visually impaired, and some people just aren't used to, like, there's protocol around how they're to receive documents. So we just have to be flexible. We offer milestone versions on our own platform, GC Cloud, and sometimes you would just send it to people in a Word doc and translate milestone versions, that kind of thing. The appetite for risk of that sort of consultation was surprisingly to the very highest levels. Like, everyone was just fine with it. And I think, I think we just waited to see if I was going to get in trouble, and it never came. So the important thing is, though, like, it doesn't substitute the need to do it properly. So the document will be edited and translated because it reads a bit like 100 people wrote it. And we're going to put it, hopefully, once all said and done, we're going to put it on open.canada.ca, which will give a formal round of consultation. It'll be gone through proper translation and give people still time to comment on the policy piece. So it's really good for co-creation. I don't think it substitutes for proper formal consultation, but it's good. It's still, like, I think the quality is really there, and I think it's due to it being a community document.
Michael, I have to say, number one, you're the coolest guy of all time. Number two, I'm very glad that we have ramen-eating Google Docs using public servants in the modern era. I think it is going to create a whole new era of innovation. Is exactly what we need. And I think that, as a startup guy and as someone who's more on the grassroots side, I mean, the idea of just jumping in and brainstorming and putting together a whole bunch of these different things, I mean, that's what we're doing day to day. And while I definitely don't subscribe to the view that, government needs to operate like a startup or anything like that, I realize that there's these layers of complexities, but having this at least initial, mash and melange of voices kind of contributing to something as big and as messy and as nascent as AI, I am really, really glad to hear that this is happening. I am also wondering, though, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of government folks inputting to this, certainly, and perhaps I missed it, but I was wondering, I mean, what does the intersector collaboration look like in the scope of even this document and this planning, or is this entirely more for internal folks to think about and to consider?
So it's a good question, because the document is actually targeted to internal people in the sense that if I'm managing a program and I want to incorporate AI, but I don't know much about it, it's a document I sort of pick up and take home and read. And I come out with an understanding of how this is going to affect my business. It points towards senior management and say, like, this is the way the government is going. And again, it also does flag to people outside of government that government will undergo a change and cares that it will do this change in a responsible and ethical manner. At the same time, it was a bit of a culture challenge to get public servants to jump in and have those conversations at the same time with academia and civil society and industry. And those different sectors were really happy having conversations on the Google Doc over certain issues. You would have a professor of computer science making a current remark and somebody in industry sort of challenging that orthodoxy as orthodox, and then they would go back and forth and come up with, my job would be sort of to coax a compromise out of them, and then we would land on language that we'd be happy with. So I think that's really fantastic. One of the most important interventions was early on from the Faculty of Engineering at University of Waterloo, and there were 2 or 3 professors that went through it with like a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the definitions were right and that they were being communicated accurately. And then from there, we had a good, solid foundation to build on.
Looking ahead to sort of the future of government, I guess, do you foresee more usage of tools like Google Docs to collect comments from a broader audience, not just internal civil servants?
Yeah. I mean, whether Google Docs or something else, I'm not stuck on the platform, but this idea of co-creation and building policy as a community, I do see it becoming more popular. Part of it's a culture thing, and part of it is the ministers do have a right to have a control a bit over the messaging, especially over things that are heavily in the spotlight. I understand the sensitivity of having the political arm making sure that they understand what's going out. Some public servants chafe around that, but I think that we have to be mindful that Like, these are the people who've been elected. So we have to sort of balance this out. This works really well because it's kind of net new for government. And we're doing something similar on blockchain, or we're doing something similar on open source. Like, this is certainly not the only one we're doing. For technology, it really works. For some policies, it won't. And so we need to find a way to sort of tease out when it'll work and when it won't, and also sort of figure out the steps. It actually takes longer, I think, to have a community drafted document because of that constant compromise, but the quality will be so much better at the end of the day.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess one thought or a question I had was, I mean, there seems to be such a race right now around governments to see who can start to innovate the fastest, the best. I mean, particularly obviously in the context of AI, but, you know, both in this conversation around procurement, which tools are governments can be using, how can they use new tools, as well as, you know, what policies are they then going to develop around the technology of new tools, things like AI. I'm wondering if there is another government or a couple other governments around the world that you feel are leading and are a good model for us. I've
seen some cool applications. There's not like one government I can point to and say they're like a clear AI leader. And I'll do that for two reasons. Like, first of all, a lot of the AI applications you're not going to see as a citizen. It's a lot of predictive risk and, you know, regulatory compliance stuff, like predicting when train wheels fall off and predicting, like, it's a lot of that stuff, which quite frankly, like, saves everyone a lot of money and time and possibly lives. The government of Canada, as a sort of passive disease, infectious disease surveillance system that looks for certain nationally reportable infectious diseases. And that's a machine learning system developed by the National Research Council of Canada. And, like, that's not something that you're going to ever interact with. Like, that's the government watching it for its people type application. And so I don't really have visibility internationally about who has tools like that. Actually, we're working with the OECD with 15 countries right now to sort of articulate, to sort of canvas of who has these sort of applications. Because right now we're not, sometimes that's shared between the domain expertise, but it's not necessarily sort of exposed and outside. And then, like, some governments have experimented with chatbots. The U.S. government uses them at different levels. It's like the U.S. government and some state governments, Australia, Singapore, Finland. You know, like there's lots of governments who've tried that mostly for tax purposes, just to answer basic questions around the tax system. I'm eager to get evaluations from them before necessarily just following along. There's enough experience from different governments in different areas that we can just turn to them and say, like, how's it worked out for you? And see those evaluations and then see if that would translate to the Canadian context. But there's different governments are leading in different places. And so there's, like, no clear leader. But in the developed world, I would say there's no clear outlier either. Like, no one's really behind.
One thing that I feel like I've heard a lot from different stakeholders and government actors and other people in society in general are this concern about AI ethics. And I find that most times when this is brought up, AI ethics is never really defined. So there's acknowledgement that this is something we should be aware of, but it's difficult for people to delve further into what actually is encompassed within that domain. So I wonder if you could give us your perspective on when you say ethics issues within AI or something, what are you referring to?
Yeah. So, you know, AI is a bit of a different technology compared to many because AI is reliant on the quality and sometimes the quantity of data, depending on what problem you're trying to solve. And government has a lot of data. There's a lot of data about people, about the environment, businesses, et cetera. And it's not, like, government has an incredible picture of the society that it's governing. And so with analytics and AI tools over that data, we can do a lot of very powerful stuff. Should we do some of that stuff is the question. AI ethics is that moment where you ask yourself, I can do something, but does the potential harm exceed the potential good? So in the case of AI, most of the time, like, most of the ethical issues are actually just data ethics or data management privacy issues. So what information do people have about me? What are they sharing and why? And is that transparent? And AI adds the extra bit, which is what are machines recommending about me? What decisions are they making? What are they predicting about me? Is that accurate, or is that based on a picture of me that is biased? And then biased either because you're collecting more data about me, and you're collecting data about me in the wrong context, or the decisions being made without understanding of that context. So AI ethics, I think generally in the world, is a bit blurry right now, but when it comes to government, I think the questions that we have to ask ourselves are actually quite well defined.
So interesting, Michael. And it's so clear that you have become a leader in the field of AI in government. See you being visible all the time in these conversations. One question we have is, we find that we're drowning in information about AI. There's so much around, and making sure that you find the right quality content, the great leaders to follow. I wanted to ask you, how have you approached learning about AI more recently, and how are you finding yourself staying up to date? For example, if you've got favorite resources, blogs, news sites, journals, influencers that you typically follow to stay up to date with the technology, as well as the regulatory advances.
Well, first of all, I'm going to challenge you. I don't know if I'm a leader of AI in government. I'm a journeyman. I just think I talk a lot, maybe talk too much. Okay, so to answer that question, I'm going to tell you I do have a privilege of working where I do with a mandate to talk to whoever I need to talk to. So often I learn from sources who are actually doing the research. So I get to talk to companies about what cool stuff they're working on and why it's important. I get to talk to academics about the work, about cutting edge emerging technologies. I often don't need to rely on third-party sources because I'm getting it right from the horse's mouth. And most people don't have access to that sort of knowledge, and that's natural but unfortunate. I do have some favorite resources. I'm not sure it's wise of me to sort of necessarily pick them out. But I will say this, as I got into history of privacy and ethics, I didn't have very much technical depth. What's important was educating myself rather on what was new, but how to read what was new. So I'm right now taking a massively online course in cognitive science in order to better read cognitive science journals and cognitive science articles. So I have a rooting in the education. That's the modules prepared by the University of Edinburgh. And I know the module has been vetted by experts, and it will teach me how to read these things in context and understand the terminology and understand where it fits in the overall knowledge scape. I'm going to be perpetually enrolled in a MOOC because the field changes so much, and you have to understand the significance of it. I do actually on that point have a worry. I watch LinkedIn sometimes of executives in businesses that are unrelated to AI or government who are reading articles that are they're poorly written and maybe gleaning stuff about the technology that isn't necessarily accurate, it's being misreported. So it's a good question, and I think it's very important to help skill up executives, finding people who can teach them from a place that's rooted in real information rather than hype. That's a really critical point, I think. For me, I spend most of my time reading core material on cognition these days so that I understand when people say AI is going to take some of the cognitive load off people, what does that actually mean? And how does an AI decision differ from a human decision?
I definitely don't think you talk too much, for the record. I think that you could be talking more because I know that I've seen a lot of content out there that's not of high quality whatsoever. And I always find anything that you post to be really interesting as a read. So I encourage all of our listeners to follow you at Super Governance on Twitter or I guess on your Medium page. But just in the interest of time, thank you so much for calling in and spending a part of your Friday here with us on Ask AI. Is there anything extra you'd like to add to the discussion? We're having some technical difficulties as well. I don't know if you can hear that on your end.
I would say AI in the public sector is sort of dark horse issue. And a lot of discussions right now in the public are focusing on, the big platforms and ethics and content moderation and all super important issues. They're going to move quickly and take up a lot of that social space. But it is important that people do understand the importance of government using these tools. That's what the conversation was a year or two ago with Compass in the United States and a few other issues. And I think it's important that people not forget that there are important but related issues when it comes to public sector use of AI. There's an incredible amount of opportunity to offer citizens profound service improvements using this technology and concerns that we can overstep. So in order to sort of keep ourselves honest, it's important that the public keep engaged and continue asking us hard questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Michael, thanks so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. I'm really looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
This episode's associate producer was Francesca Awotundun, senior producer was Mike Letourneau, and executive producer was Chris McClellan. Interview recorded by Robin Edgar. Ask AI includes this podcast, a helpful chatbot, and live events. For more information, please visit our website at askai.org. Do you have questions about artificial intelligence and workplace automation? We'd love to help answer them. Send your queries to podcast@askai.org or tweet to askai.org.